Yeah, and I think what I really want to do here is put a footnote and a set of conclusions around, I think, an incredibly valuable set of messages from the talk track today, from the kind of opening talks this morning, focusing on the application of kinetic ranges, through to that absolutely superb panel that was just packed with advice on how you can avoid some of the common missteps in the kind of cyber range space. Now, I've had a lot of experiences of this going well. I've also had a lot of experiences of this going horribly wrong. I've worked with a lot of organizations through my career, conducting exercises where I've seen kind of themes develop of certain assumptions that really inhibit people's success. And in some cases, with some actually pretty catastrophic results. And I'm not just talking about kind of wasting money or not getting the value we should. I actually think in some cases career damaging. So I want to take you through a summary of some of the things that I think it's really important we as a community, as a set of people buying technology, participating in events, developing technology, really focus on to make the most of cyber ranges and their evolving use case for us in the cybersecurity community. And I want to tie up at the end with something I think is really interesting. I actually went and surveyed 30 people who are either kind of zealots and in the limelight of the information security community, really in the the crux of the range space, or friends and family that have spent huge amounts of time organizing exercises, being in ranges, and I asked them questions about the top things they've done horribly wrong, the big mistakes they've made, and the things that they've done right that they would recommend anyone do. And I'm going to share those with you at the end, an 8 and 8 of each, so that you can take them away and make sure that we apply them to better results. I want to start off, back here at this wonderful slide that Jim Yacone presented at the beginning of the day, and just kind of touch on this really important concept that has stood the test of time. Mike Asante, who, as Jim mentioned, we were very unfortunate to lose from the information security community, established this model that, unlike many of the fast-changing concepts in our industry, continues to be as, if not more relevant today as when he first coined it. Ranges, for many, are often jammed into the singular. They're treated as a thing that we need to go and buy. You've done the training, now you go do the range. But there's actually a whole host of different types of ranges, of different types of exercises with very different objectives for different stages of maturity, for different points in your career, for different focused outcomes, depending on where you are in this cycle. And it's not just about building the blocks up, but as James mentioned, kind of retracking back down, requalifying, sharpening your skills and working back up. Now, I don't want to do this to death, but I do believe that in the kind of later portions of the presentation here, it's one of the most crucial concepts that we can pick up on. I have watched people time and time again try and go and buy a range, look at a model like this, and say, well, we're pretty good. We definitely need to be in that force on force exercise bucket. So we're going to go set up a range and we're going to run an exercise. And inevitably the conclusion is a complete abysmal failure, an explosion of horrible sorts where everyone runs into the room and manages to shoot each other, get frustrated, angry, irritated, and a lot of money is spent. One particularly pressing example of this comes from a young man, only a few years into his cybersecurity career, who I talked to not too long ago, actually, about their first experience of being a cyber range. And this small nugget, I think, perfectly classifies the danger. He said, I participated in a team exercise and was left feeling completely incompetent and went back to IT. Now, thankfully, he's back in our industry, but it actually did take some time. he participated in this exercise. There was great bravado and confidence. This would be a wonderful thing, and was so utterly destroyed by the experience, so confused, so kind of set up against colleagues, that it was an overwhelmingly negative, positive, and negative exercise, and diminished all possible value. So it's really, really important. It matters to people's professional development and their lives that we're quite careful with our application of ranges for the right time in people's careers. Now, with that health and safety warning issued, of course, this is a fascinating space, isn't it? I mean, it's fun. It's packed with cool technology and simulations and the opportunity to break into things and defend and have some fun competition. So I don't want to bring down the mood too much. And therefore, let's have a bit of levity for a moment and skip through some of the most entertaining examples of things going wrong in the range space I've seen over the past few years. The first one is needless bravado. I watched two organizations. These in particular were in the UK. They may be government organizations, although I've watched many others do something similar, engage in a completely arbitrary and pointless competition. Not a range, a competition on whose range was bigger or biggerer. They literally were competing over numbers of blade. Wow, hardware, very range. Nothing about the difference it was making, nothing about the number of iterations and training cycles of the people going through it, but how impressive it was. They had this wonderful capability. Now, that leads on to a second fairly terrible habit that develops with a lot of range projects, which is an over-obsession on recreating the internet. This is actually a wonderful screenshot from a British comedy. So it's a bit dated now, and I apologize if it doesn't translate wonderfully into other parts of the world, but this particular sketch is one in which the character here, Jen, is told that the entire internet runs in this small black box with a flashing light, and of course proceeds to protect it very carefully. And that's actually a direct parallel, despite how ludicrous that is when you think about it for a moment, a direct parallel to what lots of organizations try to do in their range projects. They obsess so hard over creating texture, texture, texture. I've literally heard the words from the mouth of a range orchestrator. How are we going to recreate Facebook so that we can have people understand the attack and defense model in social media? It's impossible, or at least exceptionally and ridiculously hard, which leads us to the question, how much realism do you really need? There's a sliding scale here, and indeed at different points with different learning outcomes, you need more or less of this. It can actually get in the way, which is a concept I'll come back to in a little more depth momentarily. Now, second to the desire to replicate the internet and not moderate texture is the desire in ranges to replicate a level of realism that instantly creates utter frustration and anger. Now, frustration can be a strategy. If you think about it, we work through training exercises. The cybersecurity industry has never been so broad, so fragmented. There have never been so many different roles with so many different tools, with such a fast pace of development we have to stay on top of. I mean, it's insane and amazing, going from the cupboard in the data center to the limelight in the public as a national issue where everyone's trying to recruit the best people. It follows that because of that fragmentation, all these different skills, we need more and more different places to be able to practice the skills that we're developing. But so many people jump straight to, let's make this so realistic and so infuriating that people will feel the pressure of what it's like in real life. Now, that's a wonderful strategy at a certain point of expertise, at a certain point of maturity, working with a team that you know very well. But it can utterly break people, per my health and safety warning early on. We need to work through the building blocks first. We need people to connect with the fun, the passion for learning, solving challenges, and persistence. You don't do that by banging your head into the wall repeatedly. You do that by being challenged, being frustrated, seeing success, learning that it's fun, getting addicted to that buzz of problem solving, and working up to some of the brutal difficulty in these higher level challenges, in some cases which are harder, truly, certainly more taxing and contrived than real life. That has its place. It can be a strategy, but it is too often a default assumption of so many buyers. Another classic is training to be really great at CTFs, training to be really great at exercises, not really great at real life. Now, kind of contrived and abstract challenges have their place. They're fun, they're entertaining. Learning about tools and command syntax and blasting through lots of things quickly can be achieved in CTF format apace. But at some point, you can form the habit of teaching people to search for flags versus the learning objective of actually being able to model an adversary or respond to an incident, of having the opportunity to misstep in those rich ways beyond the simple application of the tool, between the technical practice, communication, and outcome. And this is another mistake I've seen occur time and time again, the obsession over points and certain practices versus worrying about the learning outcomes and focusing on what you're actually trying to teach people at that point in their career. Another cardinal sin, and a fun one, a little story for you here on something I actually got to build a number of years ago that was just great fun and maybe devious, one might even say. You might want to replicate it potentially. I was invited to an organization who had a real challenge with teamwork. And again, teamwork exercises in the range space are not where I'd start. You need to work up to them. You need to work through skill acquisition, effective training, make sure you're effective with your tools, you know the language, before you work up to working together. This particular organization had been working on that for quite some time, and the seminal issue they had diagnosed from running these ranges again and again and looking at the behaviors of their people, the learning outcomes each time, was that technical practitioners wouldn't pay attention to each other's work. Yes, they would pay lip service to centralized communications and sharing, but not in a meaningful way. So we did something fun. We used range design and the diversity of different range styles and practices that are out there to build something to solve that specific issue. We took a little Raspberry Pi and configured it as a kind of emulation of a flight recorder, a little black box that the team of 5 people had to work together to work through a process of analysis, a mix of forensics, a mix of offensive. We actually wanted to blend technical skills in ways that would make people uncomfortable to play back to that learning objective, getting people to work together. But the fun masterstroke was the whole thing was engineered so that when someone ran a scan against this particular box, it would take a bunch of their data and reflect it on ports to a bunch of the other people. It would literally use the actions of one to trigger actions in the other. And so it caused complete chaos if you tried to do lots of things in parallel. You actually had to recognize that, stop, down tools, talk to each other, pick someone to do something, sequence things out, and relearn the practice of kind of technical isolation and the impact on one another. So there are lots of different types of ranges and lots of different scenarios that can be very purposely targeted around certain outcomes. And what that customer did right, that was really smart, was paying close attention to the value they were getting from ranges and designing it to solve the organizational and capability problems that they had. Just a couple more of these, and then I'm going to move to some of the quotes from people on the kind of top do's and don'ts. And I hope you're having fun and kind of noting a few of these. I imagine a few people in the audience kind of face palming with, "Oh yes, I've done that." I certainly have been guilty of some of these sins. I hope others are scribbling down things to avoid shortly. This is a big one. I mentioned earlier this idea that there was this obsession with constant realism. And at some point, that's an incredibly powerful tool. In lots of ranges, in lots of kind of projects where people are trying to right-size the range of their organization, I've heard things like, but hints are bad. We should give them an open world and see what happens. Now, granted, at a certain point of maturity, that's an excellent experience. But abstracted versions of learning, simplified versions that move people through the process, are absolutely crucial to learning. And let me give you a brutal example of that I think people here might get. This is an extreme demonstration based on teaching kids offensive cryptography. And this is a range focused on 13 to 18-year-olds. And that's why it's an extreme example that really makes the point. Here we're teaching the idea of being able to obfuscate data by changing the order of things, jumbling up data to make it hard to recover. And it's a very simple pattern. Of course, you could jump in offensive cryptography world to organizing the data into a series of sets and looking at its application to the English language and doing pattern frequency analysis. In more advanced offensive cryptography, maybe you get after the general number field sieve, depending on your level of algebraic familiarity. But that's an untenable starting place. What we do here is produce something that's purposely contrived that creates that breakthrough moment, the aha of I can actually move things into a different order to obfuscate, and I can move them back and look for a crib, expected data, something that's plain text in English that enables me to kind of get my head around the actual goal of this exercise. You can build on this with one that's more complicated. You can build on one that a human can't do manually and cause a computer to have to shuffle it. You can build on one that requires you to use modern day tools and realistic examples. You can move that along to examples from the real world, but with a framework of hints to help people move through and be encouraged. You can move through into one that purposely divides this up to require a team to work together to have the creativity and compute to solve it. And this is a concept that too often goes out the window in the obsession of my range is bigger than your range and I'm going to replicate the internet. So, being cognizant of time here, let me share with you some do's and don'ts. Now, I apologize for my wordy slides here. They are a horrible sin, I know, compared to the graphics before, but I wanted to capture them because they grab a lot of the kind of literal wording from people that I spoke to, and it'll be easier to download this and quote it thereafter in the PDF format. So let me take you through a few of these just to really draw in on what I think makes ranges valuable and right-sized to a specific organization. Things not to do. Number one, focus on the infrastructure. Lots of servers, tons of hardware. I mean, it's great to do that. But if you have weak scenarios and you don't have good learning outcomes, you're not trying to teach something, what you've got is an incredibly expensive, weird data center, right? It's just a ton of electrons flowing around without creating much value in your people. Texture matters, it needs to be applied correctly, but not as much as the learning objectives. Secondly, letting people play the game. That's letting people hack their way through using CTF tactics, hunting for points. Change things up, use diversity, change the style of game, the type of communication. Don't fall into a rut. Otherwise, you're just retraining the same muscle repeatedly without overall making that person better. Don't fail to recognize the differences in the needs of different styles of teams. I actually, at first, thought this one was really obvious. This wasn't one of mine, but it follows with actually a few examples that I thought were really, really prescient. There's a lot in common in what adversary emulation, offensive practitioners and defenders and forensics folks need. Absolutely. But the stylistic differences, the processes, the time periods over which the range is run can be very, very different. And it's important to recognize each of those variations and have a talent development plan for the different types of people in your organization, and not jam them into security people in a range. Number 4 is a big one. Running straight into a team exercise. Team exercises are hard. They can be invaluable development opportunities. But for example, throwing into a red on blue exercise with a team that don't know each other well, that aren't matured, professionalized, used to these exercises, can create permanent personality blocks, and often aren't waged fairly, frankly. They're valuable exercises, but they require finesse. They have to be used at the right time. And I've got some more advice on that momentarily, a really good point from one of my colleagues on the next slide in the do's on how to do this. So don't run away from them, but use them at the right point of maturity once you've laddered up through all of the other ranges. Watch out for unstable infrastructure that causes pain and frustration. It's technology. Things go wrong, for sure. But if you're constantly fighting technical issues, it really robs the learning experience. And it makes people not want to do this repetitiously. So that's a pretty self-explanatory one, but important. Don't fall into the trap of, I've done the training, now I do the range. There are lots of different types of ranges for different types of skill levels, yes, but cycling back through skill acquisition is important. You don't do your couple of blocks of training, learn a bunch of skills, and then just go into range land and stay there forever. You backtrack round per Micah Sante's model that I think is just one of the ones I really want to underline here as the best way to get value from ranges. Build in on top of that time with experience in the workplace, a cycle of training, hands-on experience, exercises, and you get to something really powerful. Don't fail to challenge your ROI. Look, I know this sounds really, really cheesy, but I've seen it so many times I have to say it. Organizations with substantial budgets, organizations with smaller budgets, I need a range, I must have it, that buy something, acting and spending outrageously on assumption, that don't step back and ask the question, how did it make our people better? How do we continue to get value from it year on year? Once we've done the first set of scenarios, what next? How do we cycle through again and move to that next notch? How do we continue to align it to what the cyber criminals are doing and how our adversaries are changing their tactics? And lastly, I've really touched on this one a lot, but using that diversity of range types and styles, the specialist exercises, focusing on driving specific skill acquisition, practicing communication, even using frustration as a strategy at the right time in the journey towards excellence. Now let me jump here into this set of do's, and I think this, well, some of them sound obvious, are things that can save you a lot of time and money and help you make your people better. That's really my goal here. Number 1, build confidence and then make things more challenging. Don't be scared to work through training into basic challenges, into more complex simulations, cycling through real-world experiences. Don't jump in at the deep end. It's encouraging to people. You build blocks of fun and passion and experience. That means when you get to the hard stuff at the high end, you have this lifetime pattern and experience built to stick with it, to show tenacity, to be able to challenge frustration and become a world-class practitioner. Number 2, clearly identify your leadership goals for the exercise and the outcomes. This is not done in a vacuum. It's not a technical exercise where we go have fun in a range and say, great job, we learned lots of things and had fun with tools. Really important that we're aligned to leadership on the capabilities that we are building. This was a wonderful insight from Tim Conway, who I regard as just one of the best specialists in this space and has seen so many of these exercises fly by. So I really want to underline that number 2 here. Put as much priority on the briefings and retrospectives, wash-ups, after-action reviews, oh my, what went wrong, whatever you want to call them, as you do the exercise itself. That's where the actual learning occurs. See, so many organizations blow by those and focus on the technical dynamics of the range without getting people to spend time exchanging information, learning and leveling up. Know your learning objectives, LOs, LOs, LOs. Measure against them. Did you move the needle on team understanding or capability? Or did you just have a rumble in ETH0 and throw some packets around? It's okay to do stuff for fun, have a pizza party and fire around Metasploit. That's okay once in a while, but we want to continuously focus on that next set of learning objectives. Build in the cycles to test, simulate, and develop. You don't just show up to a range, do things and leave. You don't do that in a few hours. You don't do that in a 2-day exercise. Adversaries take time to develop campaigns. They take time to develop tools. They work through validation, test scenarios, and measure outcomes. I remember many years ago being staggered when I was working on combating a cybercriminal gang that was generating hundreds of thousands of malicious code samples a day and bypassing a bunch of detection mechanisms we were creating, finding they had a quality assurance hardware rig running in China where they were QAing against all of the positive security controls in the world, finding the flaws and then shipping them on an automated basis. We need to replicate that, and it applies for defenders too. We configure, we deploy, we monitor, we test, and we refactor based on lessons learned. Those cycles are as important as the peak of the scenario. The build up to the exercise matters just as much as that. 7, map range progression into employee development and training programs. Again, I know this sounds really obvious in a talk, but I see so few organizations doing this. If you embed it into professional development plans and you make sure that people are kind of progressing, acquiring new skills, leveling up through their jobs, proving that they have what it takes to be that defender of your environment, it makes this relevant. It makes it worthy of the time, and it helps encourage the organizational recognition of ranges like we have all achieved for training to make sure we have the right skills. And last but certainly not least, again, one I want to see much more frequently. I have had so many conversations with people that engaged in range exercises, they hate it. And I've heard the same thing a lot of times from people who say the same things about the same particular setups. Share. I know we all have slightly different missions, different maturities of workforces and organizations at different points. But by sharing our procurement requirements, our goals, what we're trying to get from our ranges, and what worked and what didn't, we're actually able to avoid these missteps that are very expensive and potentially damaging to our people. Share these stories, talk to your peers. The collective intelligence of our community significantly helps you misstep here. I see Jim has come off mute. That is my prompt to stop talking about ranges, right, Jim?
James, keep going. We've got a little more time.
Well, it's a passionate subject for me, and look, there's been so much wonderful advice today, you know, from everyone. So many people who just had so much fun building ranges, being in ranges, getting value from them. I believe this range space is incredibly strategic to us as security practitioners. Security continues to expand and fragment. The skills required, the number of jobs that exist compared to where I started is unfathomable, and the pace of trying to keep up with it, amazing. And as those requirements evolve, you know, for us as security practitioners to keep up with the adversaries, to keep up with technology, we're going to have to expand the skills we need, the tools that we need, which obviously drives requirements in the places that we need to train. I think that we will see, much like we saw pen tests be the domain of higher echelons of military and intelligence before drifting into the broader world around us, something that we should all do, something that compliance regulations dictate as mandate and important, even in small businesses. I believe this range space comes crashing down into all of our worlds more and more, and it's up to us, the people in this room here, engaged in the range space now, to be savvy, to be thoughtful, not hype-driven, and to establish good practices that allow ranges to make a difference to people, focus on content and learning outcomes, not blinky, flashy lights.
James,
now I'm going to stop him.
Yeah, thank you so much. James is obviously the CTO here at SANS. He's got a pretty awesome past. and was probably one of the most wicked cyber operators for Her Majesty's Royal Government. And we are super fortunate to have him here. He is a lateral thinker, and I always have fun in conversations with James. So James, thank you for what I really got out of your synthesis is, I think, learning of outcomes drive content, and then content drives infrastructure. I mean, I think that kind of summarized that bulletized list, but what an excellent summary and things to think about.